"Mom, we did the Ouija board," and something answered, pretending to be Dad. Her son cried, holding his sister close. Her daughter's eyes were wide with fear as she whispered, "He said he was coming for us." The mother sighed. She knew exactly what plan her children were concocting, and had no intention of allowing them to continue with their charade. "Don't be stupid. Your dad isn't dead," she snapped at them. Her husband had left them 3 months prior, but it was still a fresh wound. It wasn't easy for her or her kids, but they had to move on. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Startled, the mother went to check who was there. Through the peephole, she saw 2 uniformed police officers. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this about Mark? Had he finally gotten into trouble? No, that couldn't be possible. He was always causing trouble. He even got suspended from school for fighting last week. But if it wasn't about him, then why were they here? As she opened the door, the officers stepped in. Their faces were grave, confirming her worst fears. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we need to ask you some questions about your husband's disappearance." The mother felt her knees go weak. Could it be? Did someone finally know about Mark's disappearance? How could this be happening? She invited them in and led them to the living room where her children were sitting. Her son David was comforting his little sister, Emma, who was now crying. "What's wrong?" the mother asked, kneeling beside them. But before either of them could answer, one of the officers began questioning them. "Can you tell me the last time you saw Mr. Thompson?" he asked, looking at the mother. She hesitated. How could she lie to these men? They deserved the truth. "It's been 3 months since we saw our dad," David piped up. The officer turned to him. "You sure about that, son? Because we received a call from someone saying they saw your dad with you all at the park yesterday afternoon." Both children shook their heads, tears streaming down their faces. "We haven't seen Daddy for 3 months, Emma cried. The mother felt a surge of protectiveness towards her children. How could anyone say such a thing? Who would do this to them? But the officer wasn't convinced. Something wasn't adding up. "Mrs. Thompson, are your children possibly playing some kind of joke?" he asked, turning back to her. The mother shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, hoping they would believe her. The officer noticed the mother's reaction and decided to change his approach. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe that you know more than you're letting on. If you could just come with us to the station house and no," the mother interrupted, her voice shaking, "I won't let my kids go with you." The officers were taken aback by her sudden outburst. They had never seen her this agitated before, but they weren't backing down. This case was far from over. One of the officers handed her a card. "Then I suggest you call us if you remember anything," he said, hoping she would reconsider. But deep down, he knew that whatever they were dealing with here, it went beyond anything they could have imagined. The mother watched them leave, her heart pounding in her chest. What did they mean? Why were they really here? She looked down at her children, their faces pale with fear. She knew she had to do something to protect them. As the night wore on, the mother grew increasingly worried about her children. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. And deep down, she knew that whatever they were dealing with, it was only getting worse. To be continued in Part 2. Part 2. The incessant pounding on the front door jolted Clara awake. Her heart raced as she looked towards the bedside clock, its glowing red numbers spelling out 3 a.m. A wave of dizziness hit her, and she quickly sat up, her eyes searching for her husband, Mark. But he wasn't by her side. He was in the living room, or rather his spirit was. It had been 3 months since Mark tragically died in a car accident, leaving Clara and their 2 kids, Lily and Max, devastated and lost without him. The kids had taken his death particularly hard. Even though he'd only been gone a few short months, they already seemed to have forgotten what he sounded like, how he smelled, and most importantly, how he looked. And that was what was so freaky about this. A sudden gust of wind slammed the front door open, making Clara jump. She watched in horror as the wind ruffled the pages of the diary that lay open on her nightstand. It was Max's diary, the one she'd given him on his 12th birthday last year. The diary she knew he'd confided all his deepest secrets and fears into, the same diary he'd used to communicate with his father after his death. Every night before bed, Max would take the diary into the living room and place it on the coffee table next to the Ouija board. Then he'd ask his dad questions and move the planchette across the board, tracing out letters to spell out answers. At first, these sessions were filled with lighthearted banter. Max would ask his dad what he was doing in heaven, how he felt about his new baby brother, and even what his favorite sports injury was. Then the tone would shift. Max would ask when he would see Dad again, and the planchette would spell out soon. Too soon? Or the scariest one, I'm not in heaven. Every morning, Clara found Max in the living room, asleep next to the diary and the Ouija board. At first, she'd been amused by it all, finding comfort in knowing her son was connecting with his dad. But recently, things had taken a dark turn. Clara had started having nightmares that Mark was in danger, that he was trapped somewhere and needed her help. In her dreams, she'd hear his voice calling out to her, his words desperate and pleading. But when she tried to respond, her voice wouldn't come out. She could only watch in horror as he faded further and further away from her, his face becoming more and more distant, until it was nothing but a blurry, distorted memory. These dreams were different from the ones she'd had right after Mark's death. Back then, they were filled with an overwhelming sense of loss and an aching emptiness that mirrored the hole in her heart. But now there was a new emotion creeping into her dreams. Fear. A primal, gut-wrenching fear that something was very wrong. One night, she woke up to the sound of sobbing. Max was sitting on the floor next to the bed, his face buried in his diary. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, kneeling down beside him. He looked up, his eyes redrimmed and swollen. "I asked Dad if he could come home tonight, and he said yes." "Oh, sweetheart," she hugged him, trying to convey the idea that only his dad could answer that question. Just then, Lily came bounding into the room, her eyes shining with excitement. "Mommy, can we do the Ouija board again tonight? Please, please, please." Clara hesitated. Something inside her screamed at her to say no, but looking at her kids, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Not tonight, she thought. As the evening wore on, the kids grew more and more excited, talking about all the fun they'd have when their dad came home. Clara tried to focus on their happiness, pushing down the unease that had been gnawing at her all day. But as the clock struck 9, she felt a sudden chill run down her spine. She excused herself to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. "What am I doing?" she asked herself, leaning against the cool tiles. When she heard the kids call out to her, she forced herself to smile and rejoin them in the living room. As the kids began setting up the Ouija board, Clara felt a growing sense of dread. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was all in her head. But as the planchette began moving, spelling out messages from beyond the grave, she knew she was in for a night she wouldn't soon forget.